At the risk of stating the obvious, there is a wide ocean of games spanning countless genres. If you lack the reflexes to play an intense FPS or fighting game, fear not. You also have point and clicks, farming sims, turn-based strategy games, and many others to sate your fix. Some games you might find too easy, others too hard. With every release of a game that's even remotely challenging, there's invariably contention over whether or not gaming should accommodate those who are less able. If you've been watching my videos with any level of regularity, I think you already know where I stand on the matter. There's merit in a game being easy as much as being hard, but I personally feel that difficulty ultimately leads to a better product. Why, you ask? Well, in order to understand that, I think we first need to go into what about the game necessitates the challenge to begin with. Conventional games are made up of rules. In basketball, you have to dribble the ball while moving. You can't dribble with both hands, etc. In chess, each piece is beholden to a specific direction and distance. You take the king, you win the game, regardless of however many other pieces the player has. The challenge is born as a result of these parameters, and it is up to the player to decide whether or not these rules intrude upon the fun or enhance it. The difficulty exists to encourage the player to leverage the game's rules and their own personal strengths as they pertain to the game to their advantage. When discussing video game difficulty, Fringy brought up that a game needs to have a fail state in order to be a game, else it becomes something else entirely. It's why I hesitate to call visual novels games. While a fair few have game overs, a lot of them also just lead you to a different outcome. Fail states are the punishment for not properly participating in the game's rules. Without those rules, there is no reason to play. While I understand that some people just want to unwind after a hard day at work, there's far more value in a victory that you earn rather than one that is practically given to you. It goes without saying that difficult games provide more of a challenge. People generally enjoy having some sense of superiority. We like to be better than others at certain things. It allows us to get immersed and escape from the real world because we are so focused on overcoming the game. Those of you who have played the various versions of Final Fantasy IV knows that the Western release on SNES was watered down considerably from its original Japanese release. Cecil couldn't use darkness, Yang couldn't use chakra, and Rosa couldn't use prey. And of course, the enemies were considerably less aggressive. For that reason, it is perhaps the weakest version of an otherwise great game. Eventually, the original features were thankfully restored in the PlayStation release, including the difficulty. Fast forward to 2007, and the game has been remade for the DS. Right from the outset, enemies are out for blood. But your abilities are also much stronger. Not only does Cecil have darkness, but it doubles your damage output in exchange for HP. Edward is given the ability to choose which songs the player wants to use, and because you do eventually lose these abilities as the game goes on, you can earn them back via augments, effectively giving your characters a second class. And because enemies are harder, you have no reason not to use these new mechanics. I've heard some people refer to the original Castlevania as dated due to its stilted controls, which I strongly disagree with. Think about other platformers that were out during the time. Super Mario Bros., Mega Man, Ghosts and Goblins, all of these games had fairly fluid controls. Castlevania was the iconoclast in this regard, and doing so opened up a different realm of challenge. No longer was charging headlong into danger a viable option. Players had to think carefully about how they approached a given situation. Committing to an arc when jumping forward made them think twice because they could not correct it if they messed up. Being stationary while attacking, in a singular direction I should add, also meant that you had to carefully position yourself before attacking. It also incentivized the use of the game's sub-weapons. If I could play this game like Mega Man, I would have never thought to use the holy water on the Frankenstein's monster, or the cross in the Grim Reaper. The counterbalance is having finite ammunition, thus making the players optimize how they use the whip. I'll probably catch some heat for saying this, but this is precisely why I regard Castlevania 4 as vastly inferior. Because the player could use the whip in multiple directions, It was really the only attack that mattered. The axe went from being a lifesaver during a critical moment to a fifth wheel. You could rack up hearts without even knowing it, thereby removing a very vital system to the game's formula and gameplay loop. It was designed as if it were a traditional Castlevania game with more restrictive controls, and thus the challenge was watered down substantially. Castlevania 4's lack of the need of sub-weapons gave way to a concept in Game 3 known as dominant strategy. It's an idea whereby a single strategy is so good that it's the only thing a player has to use to win. In the video game world, the outcome usually means that the game's challenge is virtually non-existent. The game becomes repetitive because we as players will often look for the optimal way to beat it. And the optimal way often includes the easiest way. We humans don't generally put ourselves through more than we have to. If there exists an easy way out, there will always be an incentive to do so. It doesn't matter if you put the game in hard mode specifically to have a challenge, you'll at least want to know how well the dominant strategy fares there. However, I feel it bears mentioning that while challenge and difficulty heavily overlap, they're not necessarily the same. It's a bit like how easy and simple don't mean the same thing. On the flip side, there are games like A Link Between Worlds and Mega Man X, which aren't exactly difficult when compared to their predecessors. But the games were still consistently engrossing because of their systems and how they affected their design. In introducing the wall jump in Mega Man X, the developers opened up a whole new world of not only designing levels, but also enemies. Overall, it is easier compared to the classic series, but I consider it a better game because of just how much Capcom optimized the use of wall jumping. A Link Between Worlds wall merging had a tremendous effect on how the player could navigate the world and solve puzzles. The games offered challenges, and while they weren't hard, they were still designed such that the player was given an incentive, if not necessity, to engage in their mechanics. There is an art to not only making a game with deep and rewarding systems, but also easing the player into said systems so that they don't feel forced. Fighting games unfortunately struggle the most in this regard. To many people, getting into the deeper tech feels more like work than fun, which I can understand. While these are not fighting games, Doom Eternal and the original God of War do a great job at this. Doom Eternal encourages you to use your entire arsenal by having enemies with specific weak points. The original God of War has enemies that require specific moves in order to break defenses. Some enemies can be blocked, while others are so large that they have to be dodged. And while it takes a while to get there, Xenoblade 2 also gives great incentives to use its combo system. Your enemies are not only unable to attack, but you're also given recovery potions and loot drops. You would already be inclined to use it because it immobilizes your enemies and racks up damage, but having extra rewards like loot ensures you will want to use it. Having systems like that in a fighting game single-player mode would probably be the best way to get more players to consider playing it more seriously, and would do so in a way that doesn't alienate veteran players. Imagine, for example, if Soul Calibur had a beat-em-up campaign with enemies that could only be vulnerable after a guard impact, or some that require launchers before damaging, or even armored enemies that are invulnerable to everything but grabs. To encourage combos, it could reward players with more gold or experience points. It makes for a far more effective teaching tool because you're playing the game as you learn its ins and outs, rather than sitting through a bunch of crappy tutorials. To circle back to my main point, difficulty isn't necessary for a game to be good or even great, but without some degree of challenge, there's no point to the game. If I'm being honest, I don't even think difficulty modes, much less easy modes, are very helpful to most games. Easy modes tend to trivialize the challenge to the point where the game practically plays itself, and perhaps the only game that does a hard mode well that I can think of is Cuphead. The rest of them just give enemies more health and you take more damage. Demon's Souls established a theme by having one uniform difficulty, and conferred the game design with far more focus, and it was a better experience for it. Before you give me hate in the comments, ask yourself this: if there is no challenge, Would you even bother racking up combos in Valkyrie Profile? Would you even be concerned with trying to get headshots with your bow in Breath of the Wild? Would you even be scared of the enemies in Resident Evil, or any horror game for that matter? Ponder that for a moment. In any case, what do you folks think about challenge and difficulty? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, over and out.